Welcome to Global Tax Talk. I'm Will Morris, and I'm filming here in New York City, where I'm delighted to be joined by Sarah Hickey, who is an ITS partner in here on our Australia desk. Sarah, welcome.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
Great to have you. Okay, so let's talk about Australia. So what significant tax policy trends have you been seeing in Australia over the past year? And really, how have these impacted companies and how are they reacting to them?
So it's a great question, Will, and it's a really interesting time in Australia because we're seeing the government focus a lot on increased disclosure and reporting. And so that's manifesting this way in two things that are actually going to become due towards the end of this year. So the first one is that Australia's introduced public country-by-country reporting, and the level of disclosure that's required is actually beyond that of the EU. So Australia is really kind of going out in front here. That is something that a lot of taxpayers are very interested in, particularly because of the granularity of disclosures. So that's one of the key themes. And then the second one is an increased requirement for reporting around significant transactions. And so Australia, through the Australian Tax Office, has introduced a new schedule to the local file that's required at the end of each year. And that schedule is basically like a DAC 6 requirement. So it's going to require reporting of significant restructures or deemed restructures, including indirect transfers of Australian entities. So actually a pretty comprehensive disclosure requirement, and one that's going to be backdated as well. So 2023 and 2024 transactions are due in 2025. So lots going on there.
Great, thanks very much, Sarah. And as we all know, where Australia leads, others tend to follow. So more to come on this. Okay, so let's move into something a little more specific. So the High Court in Australia recently sided with a taxpayer, PepsiCo, in a case about whether payment for beverage concentrate should be treated as royalties and subject to withholding tax. What does this decision mean for companies that use or license IP in Australia, and how might it change the ATO's approach going forward, do you think?
So the PepsiCo case was a fantastic win for the taxpayer, but actually it is an interesting case when we step back and look at what the court did over a series of judgments. And so the court found in a majority decision that there was not an embedded royalty in the payment that was made under the Pepsi contract. But quite interestingly, 3 of the 4 judges did find that there was an embedded royalty there. So we've got a split court and a real difference of view. And I think what this means is that for taxpayers that are in a slightly different situation and are thinking about whether their software distribution arrangements have a royalty component, there's not really that confidence that you can say an embedded royalty won't be interpreted in there. And so really what it means is that when we look at the Pepsi case, we have to look at the features of that case and how they can help an argument. And the key feature that helps an argument around embedded royalties is really to start by honing in on the contract and what the contract literally says a payment is for. And so that's going to be, I think, the main takeaway for those in the software development kind of industry, but there's certainly a lot to come on that. And so the ATO is basically obliged to reissue some guidance, but that still hasn't come to bear yet. So we're still waiting to see what will happen there.
Great. So moving on. So what actions are companies taking to get ahead of these issues, do you think?
So I think in terms of the Pepsi case, there's also some procedural issues that are still being resolved in the Australian courts. And that relates to another taxpayer who's seeking to stay proceedings in the federal court and pursue a MAP process instead. That's actually in appeal at the moment, so we don't know whether the Australian courts are going to allow for a process that goes through sort of bilateral resolution rather than domestic resolution. But that's one strategy that's being employed to make sure that there is an opportunity for both positions and both countries involved in a dispute to have their say. The other thing that we're seeing a lot of parties do around the Pepsi case and embedded royalties and software is to really have a look back at their contracting and ensure it's clear and concise in how it's worded. So in terms of Pepsi, embedded royalties and software, that's the focus. And then for disclosure issues, the focus is really around stakeholder management and making sure that the right information is getting to the right people at the right time. So particularly with some of the rules that I was mentioning earlier, because they're so new, a lot of times the fact that they're coming in and the level of disclosure involved has not necessarily made its way through to the right parts of the organisation. So the taxpayers that are really getting out ahead of things here are the taxpayers that are making sure not so much the Australian local team who have to do the filing are aware of what's going on, but perhaps the global team that were involved in a big restructure where Australia was a very small part are aware of the fact that that restructure might need to be disclosed and are starting to think about that. So it's very much communications and understanding that environment in Australia, which, as you said at the start, Will, is a very unique environment.
So one bonus question, if I may. So we've talked about Australia often leading. We talk a lot also about AI, and I understand that the ATO uses AI a lot, but also that the National Audit Office has done a report on that. So could you just tell us a little about AI and the ATO?
Yeah, so I mean, AI is a favourite topic for a lot of us at the moment. So it's no surprise that the ATO are using AI. They're a very forward regulator. They've always employed a lot of data scientists, and so they've always had a lot of pride in that aspect of what they do. More recently, the an Australian kind of federal audit office has gone in and reviewed how the ATO is using AI, give them some feedback around governance, and as part of that review, the ATO has actually explained what it's doing, given some examples, and so some examples of how it's using AI are to go and have a look at tax agent behaviour and see how tax agents are kind of filing returns and whether there's any themes around that. They're also using it predictively in terms of property sales. So is there anything around the dates and timing of a property sale that indicates perhaps it's on revenue account rather than capital account? So I think this is the tip of the iceberg in what we might see. But like everybody else, clearly the ATO is thinking about this and thinking about how the immense amount of data that they have can be used to help them achieve their goals.
Okay, a changing world indeed.
Changing world.
Good. Sarah, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Will.
And we'll look forward to getting you back to discuss more about this. And thank you for joining us, and come back next time so that you stay global tax ready.